next guy on this list who might be rising because of some of the injury situations in his backfield, it's David Montgomery. Now, on top of bringing in Damian Williams this offseason, the Chicago Bears also have Tariq Cohen to worry about, a guy that they did pay a lot of money to continue to be there, a guy who really has been one of these scat backs like a Nyheim Hines, like a Chase Edmonds, fits right into that mold where he's going to take a lot of the pass catching volume from the RB1, which we hate for fantasy purposes, but David Montgomery has been a guy who's consistently breaking tackles, staying relatively efficient even behind pretty bad offensive lines. Alex, are you excited this year for David Montgomery?
Well, it's hard to say excited. I mean, he is sitting here in our tier 5, which to me is like still fine RB2 range. If I do take that elite tight end earlier, I do take one of those high upside wide receivers early in my draft. If I end up with a Myles Gaskin, a Travis Etienne, a David Montgomery as my RB2, I think you're fine. And honestly, debatable. I know this is supposed to be our consensus tiers. I would have Josh Jacobs in this tier as well, but for the sake of this show, we'll get into him in tier 6. But yeah, David Montgomery, I don't think I'm excited, but I'm definitely okay. Because he's going to continue to get volume in 2021. And one of the biggest things we look for in fantasy football is volume. We say, what's the talent? What's the opportunity? And what does that mean for their fantasy football value? And we're just so quick to forget how good players are one season to the next. Earlier, I talked about Melvin Gordon, and I was just shocked that he was the PPR running back 14 because of what the perception of him is now. And I was also very surprised to be reminded that David Montgomery was the PPR running back 4 last season. Like, absolutely ridiculous. He doesn't feel like a guy that has top 5 running back upside, but he was right there. He had 247 carries, 1,070 yards, and 8 touchdowns. And the big thing for him in 2020 was the 68 targets that he saw. 54 receptions for 438 yards and 2 touchdowns. Ooh. So obviously a lot has changed in Chicago as we head into 2021. You mentioned it with Damian Williams there, with Tariq Cohen coming back from an injury. Even if he's not ready for camp for week 1, he will play this season. At least that's my belief at this point. You obviously have Justin Fields as well coming in to take over at quarterback. You and I are both very excited about his outlook. I think he's going to be starting for the Bears sooner rather than later. So given all of this information, I think David Montgomery comes down a bit in the receiving game. He's not going to see 4.5 targets a game this season. But to me, he proved he can take care of business. He was good when he got that opportunity in 2020. So I think he still will see an increased receiving workload from what he saw in his rookie season. I think it's going to be somewhere there in the middle, maybe like 3.5 targets a game, which is still going to be very valuable. But with David Montgomery, I think the carry volume is going to remain sky high, which just gives him a very, very stable floor for this season. You've already got Matt Nagy, head coach, saying he wants to get Montgomery 20-plus carries a game. So if, he comes up from the 16.5 carries a game he saw last year to 20, if he ends up seeing over 300 carries this season, he's a lock to be, a top 16 running back in fantasy football if he doesn't get hurt, because 300-plus carries – essentially, unless your efficiency is next level bad, means you're getting 1,200 plus yards. There's going to be a touchdown opportunity that comes with that as well. So I think the floor is super high for David Montgomery, and that's why I don't mind him as a running back too. You have these guys with the big upside, the DeAndre Swifts, the Joe Mixons, guys we've talked about. That's why they're in higher tiers. But with David Montgomery, I think we saw the upside last season. I don't think we're going to get that again in 2021, but he should have a really high floor, which is a reason I love him for a fantasy football roster, dependent on your roster construction. I think the offensive line in Chicago is going to be very important as well. Pro Football Focus has them ranked 27th right now for 2021, which is obviously not good, but I think they're going to be better than that. They lost a couple of veterans on this line. They're going to have some new pieces in place, including rookie Tevin Jenkins, who they picked up in the second round at the tackle position. So again, I think the line is going to be better than they give it credit for. Not a top 10 unit by any means, but it should be enough to make David Montgomery not only an effective runner in this backfield, but certainly fantasy football relevant for your team in 2021.
Yeah, those last 5 weeks of the season, averaging 26 PPR points in those weeks. Be unrealistic for us to expect that from him again, but even in the games where Montgomery and Tariq Cohen were on the field together, Montgomery was still getting 15 carries and a couple targets a game, so should be very, very safe with that volume. Like you mentioned, tier 6, Josh Jacobs was a guy, we could move him into tier 5. I don't
Tier
mind.
5.5.
Perfect, yes.